So thanks so much for having me. It's great to see so many familiar faces and friendly faces in the audience. I mentioned this to Paolo before, but actually I learned the first thing about experimental economics from Paolo when we were at the Max Planck Institute. So I just say that in case you have any complaints about experimental design, just email straight to Paolo. So with that, today's topic is the impact of political polarization on social preferences. And this is a very topical discussion right now, obviously, with everything that's going on in the US. I'm currently in Germany. So it's, everything that I see and hear about is sort of filtered through the German news. So let me just show you first what I've encountered in Philly a few weeks ago while they were still counting the votes in Pennsylvania. All right, so this was sort of the time when some people wanted to stop the vote, stop the count, make sort of Trump win Pennsylvania, and on the other side you had the the people who want all the votes being counted, and that's something that you've seen all over the U.S. For the past couple of weeks and months, and of course it's sort of culminating and hoping and waiting for sort of Trump leaving the office on January 20th. So let me give you a point of departure of where sort of the project stands and what I try to achieve in this paper. So a lot of existing literature, a lot of literature across economics and psychology and political science especially, tries to understand the relationship between political polarization and negative externalities. And some of them are racial inequality and factional conflict and partisan animosity. So we know that these things are related. And the reason why it's important to study these type of questions is that they create a threat to democratic values, right? There is, in a way, a problem in terms of how political clusters will cooperate with each other, trust each other, and the extent to which this might impede trust. So what you see here is from the Pew Center. They've done some evaluations across the past decades. And what you can see is that there is a growing divide in the US between Democrats and Republicans. Now, on top of all of that, especially the US is a very peculiar case because in the US, there are issues that you wouldn't expect to be polarizing issues. There are issues that divide the left and right, especially with respect to mask wearing. So in July, the New York Times published a report, and you can see a very high correlation between the extent to which masks have been worn and the political affiliation. And then YouGov published a poll a couple of weeks ago, which is extremely worrisome because it tells you a lot about how deep the divide goes in the U.S. And they asked the people, to what extent do you approve and believe that Biden won in a legitimate way? And what you can see here is that there's this extremely stark divide between Trump's voters and Biden voters, and that's something that goes to show that the rift between the left and the right is extremely deep. Now, in addition to this, there's an additional layer of divide, which is called the dehumanization divide. And the dehumanization divide is with respect to not how we believe, or how we feel about others, but what we believe others believe about us. So it's in a way a second order belief of our perception of how other people perceive us. And you can see this little animation on the right. There's a discrepancy between how Republicans and Democrats believe they're being seen by the other party and the extent to which they're actually seen. So the way this scale works is from a 0 to 100 is how developed are you as a human being? And you can see that not only is there a big gap, but also the gap is larger for the Republicans. Right? Now, ex ante, if you think about social welfare sort of consequences of polarization, it's not quite clear what the welfare consequences are. You can imagine a situation in which there's enough outgroup animosity that will reduce sort of the overall aggregate willingness to cooperate and engage with each other, and this would create a net negative. But also on the flip side, you can imagine that the divide is so big that it creates clusters that will overcompensate the lack in cooperation, and sort of it will increase the intrafraction cooperation. Now, my paper is not going to talk about the welfare consequences, but this is just going to show, this just goes to show that there are different facets of polarization. There are different ways in which we can pick up the impact of polarization. And so one thing that my paper will try to achieve here is to show you that in-group, out-group, the way often economists think about the impact of some type of polarization, it's not necessarily two sides of the same coin. Sometimes we can have only one without the other, and sometimes we can have both. And one of the things that I want to do in this paper is to sort of disentangle those channels and show in which context do we have the in-group love, and what, in which context we have out-group hate, and which we have both, and maybe none in others. So here's the contribution that I'm trying to make. So there are more studies that I'm running at this moment. I will actually show at the very end, if I have time, I will show you some additional insights from stuff that I've just been running most recently. So what I'm trying to do here is to examine multiple layers, in particular behavioral belief in norm-based mechanisms with which this type of intergroup conflict can materialize. So we'll try to capture the impact of intergroup conflict along different types of dimensions. And I will do that across different settings. I will do that in strategic and non-strategic settings. In some settings will capture cooperativeness, and others will capture altruism. I will have measures for pro and antisocial behavior. I will also have measures of social norms. And I will do that across two different domains. And I will explain to you in more detail why I need these two different domains, but you will see results both for the political domain. I mean, as the title suggests, this will be a story about Trump, but I will also have a minimal identity domain that I will mention in a second. So there are a couple of questions that I try to tackle before I sort of dive into the designs of the different experiments. One is behavioral, right? So if polarization is an issue, then we should see that in a behavioral domain. How does polarization affect these types of altruistic and anti-sort of social decisions, right? So what are the social preference implications that come straight from sort of political polarization that I'm picking up in my experiment? Do they take shape of in-group love, out-group hate, or both? And in addition to this, I will also think about perceptual domains. And those relate to two ones in particular. One is sort of the interpersonal closeness domain. How close do we feel to people who have the same political belief versus those who have a contrary political belief? But also social norms. I do a lot of work on social norms, and of course it's interesting to me to not only observe the behavioral and perceptual impact of polarization, but also understand, do social norms that we can elicit in that environment comport and sort of go in our aligned with the behavioral variation that we pick up across the different domains. All right, so across all of my results, you will always see these two elements. You will see some behavioral measure, and you will also see some perceptual measure. Now, I might not have the time to go into detail of social norms results. I'll give you a broad overview. Of course, you're welcome to check out the paper, and I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. But the long story short is that a lot of the behavioral implications that you will see will be quite aligned with the social norms that I will be picking up in this experiment. So what is the setting in which I'm going to study these type of questions? So I will have 3 economic games that will capture all these 3 settings that I just described. There will be a non-strategic setting. And the non-strategic setting is one that I've been using a lot in my own work, and that originates in Lists and Bardsley's sort of papers in 2007 and 8. And the idea will be to use an extended version of a dictator game, a game in which, in addition to being able to give or not to give, the dictator also has the ability to take from the receiving party, right? And that allows me to not only pick up lack of altruism, but also active sort of antisocial, harmful behavior towards the receiving party. The second setting will be a strategic setting. It's called the ABC of cooperation approach. It's a variant of the public goods game. It has 3 elements, A, B, and C, that I will describe in detail. And it originates in sort of Fischbacher, Gechter, but also more recently, Gechter and colleagues have published the Nature Human Behavior paper, where they sort of use that method to explain something in their context. And I'm going to piggyback off of what they did and implement sort of their version of the ABC approach into the context of political polarization. I will go over all the details in a second. The third one is a social setting. So this is going to be a normal elicitation approach, standard approach following the Kupka-Weber elicitation. Now, I mentioned I will have two identity frames. I will have one, which is going to be participants hate or love for Donald Trump. It's going to be framed in the context of Donald Trump. And I'm going to elicit their preferences for or against Donald Trump. And the second setting will be a minimal group setting. I'm going to use the standard Tashfel paradigm and also that Chen and Lee did in their papers. It's going to be a measure based on a participant's preferences for clean Kandinsky paintings. Now, I will implement both frames. So the reason why I'm implementing both frames is because it will actually allow me to disentangle in-group love from out-group hate, and you will see how that works when I show you the results side by side. Now, I mean, I'm in a group of great experimental economists, so of course this question is important to get out of the way first, which is all of the results that you will see today are completely between design. Right? Every participant only participated in one variation of the game and one variation of the identity frame. Nobody knew anything about something else, and nobody was asked to do any additional decisions other than those. All right, so let's talk about the first design, and then I'm happy to take questions along the way, because I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. But the design is very straightforward. What I will do, actually, let me try to move. I see here. Okay, there you go. All right, so now I see my screen. So I will always show you the results for the Trump prime and the minimal group prime, the design for those side by side. So it's easy for you to see what the differences are. There are always two stages, and participants don't know about the second stage until they reach the second stage. And so in the Trump prime, this is what happens. Participants see a picture of Donald Trump. This is exactly the picture that they see. They see Trump with the thumbs up and the mega head. And I asked them a very simple question, which is on a Likert scale from like -2 to +2. How do they feel about Donald Trump? And it varies from extreme hate to extreme love. And by the way, I should have mentioned this. Not only is all of this between design, but also everything that you will see in the analyses and the data collection is pre-registered. So all of these analyses that I will show you are in line with what I sort of pre-registered and wanted to do. So I give participants this ability to tell me how they feel about Trump. And after that, I tell them, I'm going to randomly match you now with one other participant. And for this one other participant, you might know one of three things, right? Either the participant you matched with hates Trump, or that participant loves Trump, or you don't know the opinion of that person about Trump. Now, you only see one message. You don't know the other people. You only see you're now matched with somebody who hates Trump, or you're matched with somebody who loves Trump. The person for whom it's not disclosed, in a way, this is a natural comparison group for me. This will be a way for me to sort of show if I don't disclose the opinion about Trump, how do people play with somebody for whom the opinion about Trump is unknown? Now, unknown does not mean that person has no opinion about Trump. It just means you don't know whether that person hates or loves Trump. Okay, and that's being made clear to the participants. And so after I matched them to one participant, I used the iOS scale, the inclusion of others in the self. And it's a very standard social psychology scale, but then was later sort of validated by economists. And the idea is to measure the extent to which one sort of feels close, individually close to the matched participants. Right, and you can sort of see the overlapping circles here, and extremely overlapping circles means you're feeling very close, and extremely distant circles means you're not feeling close. And so this is already the first measure that I'm going to use across experiments, which is this is the feeling of closeness, the perception of closeness across different experimental domains. And so once they answer that question, I'm now playing the extended dictator game with them. They keep being matched with the same participant. They still play with the same person that they just saw. And they know that they can now decide one of the reactions in a way, which is I'm using a starting endowment that John List used in his JPE paper. The dictator has $10, and the recipient, the random recipient, has $5. And so the dictator can decide whether or not to give some of his own money to the recipient, or whether or not to take some of the money from the recipient, or leave the equals, or leave the initial split. Now, the dictator can give up to $5. So an equal to establish equality, a dictator would give $2.50, right? So then both have 7.5. But he can also take up to 5, right? So you can harm the recipient by completely taking all of the money from the recipient. And so this is all that happens in this experiment. Now, in my results, I'm actually going to mostly focus on whether somebody is being matched with, somebody for whom how they feel about Trump. I'm not going to talk much about the undisclosed Trump preference people. And the reason for that is, everything is an appendix of the paper. The reason for that is that the results fall exactly in between everything that you will see, right? It's a very nice sort of comparison group for that.
Can you take two clarifying questions?
Of course.
Please. Did participants know the full set of possible options for what they might see?
Did they see the full set of options? So I'm assuming this is related to whether they knew that they could be randomly matched with somebody who hates Trump, loves Trump, or for whom the opinion is undisclosed. I did not tell them anything. I asked them how they feel about Trump, and then after that, I just showed them one random participant who had one opinion about Trump. I didn't tell them there's also somebody else that you could have met. But I'm assuming they understand that because they just told me how they feel about Trump, they naturally see now somebody else for whom they know or don't know their opinion about
Trump. And another clarifying question: there may be people hating Trump but voting Republican, right?
Yes, yeah, and I don't really care about that distinction here. I'm using Trump in a way as a prime, and I will show you that I'm picking up very similar things if I do. So let me not spoil that. I will have like a surprise for you at the end, so I don't want to spoil that. Let me just say that I'm not actually interested in how you voted. I'm just interested in how you feel about that, because this is what actually creates the rift in the current society. It's not so much only are you Republican and Democrat. I think many people can appreciate you voting for a different party. I think many people in the US have no understanding whatsoever how anybody can vote for somebody like Trump. And so I'm using Trump as an example. I could have used something else, but I'm using Trump. So I do ask people at the very end whom they voted for, and I use that in regressions to control for that, but I don't disclose that. I'm not saying your match partner loves Trump but hates Republicans or something like that. Like I'm not disclosing any of that. So I'm keeping it simple. All right? Cool. All right. So this is everything that happens in the Trump prime. And then the minimal group prime works exactly in the same way, except for one extra step, which is I'm also starting with the Trump prime for two reasons. Number one, I'm starting with the Trump prime because I don't want my results to be potentially tainted by the fact that in the Trump prime, I'm using Trump as a prime, and then that prime sort of disappears in a minimal group condition, right? So I'm keeping the Trump prime constant, and I'm using the same Trump prime in a minimal group environment. But the other reason why I need that is because I'm later going to subdivide the results based on a participant's Trump opinion. And I can only do that, of course, if I also elicit Trump opinion from the minimal group people, right? So they start with the same picture, but then they're being asked to vote for sort of the paintings that they like. And this is the standard procedure. I give them a couple of Klee-Kandinsky paintings. They just tell me what they like, and then they become group Klee or group Kandinsky. And that's it. And after that, everything now is going to be exactly the same, except for the fact that they never know anything about their matched partner's Trump preference. So rather than telling them anything about the matched partner's Trump preference, I'm going to tell them everything about the minimal group preference. So what they will see now is you randomly match with somebody who is a Klee friend, or like has a preference for Klee or has a preference for Kandinsky, and you chose Klee or you chose Kandinsky. I mean, presumably, many people don't even know whether they like Klee Kandinsky based on the paintings that they click. So I tell them you clicked that you like Klee, and so now you're being matched with somebody who also likes Klee or likes Kandinsky, or you don't know. And then they play the same dictator game, but now rather than being matched with a Trump person, they're now being matched with a Klee Kandinsky person. Okay, so now you can see it's completely parallel, and that allows me to now disentangle a couple of things. And so let me show you some results, unless we have questions about the design still. Rustam, anything that I need to?
Yes, there's one question. Why not having the preferences for the two topics, Trump and paintings, in the two treatments?
Why not having them in the two treatments? Yes, I agree. I mean, there could be, I could have also included the painting. I started doing this project, I had no intention to use the painting preferences for the Trump people, and I thought I would like to make this experiment as sort of simple and straightforward as possible. Presumably, if I would have also asked about Klee Kandinsky and then never used that, so the prime is so minimal that it's not going to do much. But I will also show you that across all of my results, the Klee Kandinsky preference do not actually play any role in the results. You will see that in a second. So I think it's a good question. I could have also included Kandinsky here. I assumed it's not necessary because I'm not going to do that. I was much more concerned. I mentioned that in addition to them telling me how they feel about Trump, I asked him to write a couple sentences to justify that feeling. And I do that for two reasons. One, it creates a bigger prime, so they engage with that topic a little bit more. But two, I can also filter out bots and sort of bad responses and all of that, right? And so I pre-registered I'm going to throw out the people for whom I cannot decipher, or like my RAs cannot decipher what exactly participants wrote. So I left it out, assuming it's not going to matter. I think it's a good question. I don't think it's going to affect anything much, but of course I don't have sort of the counterfactual for that question. Thanks, sir. So,
yeah.
All right, so let's talk about the results. So I'm going to present you the results always in the same way. So once you understand this way of showing you the results, you will understand every result I'm going to show you in this paper. At the top, you will see the Trump prime results. And at the bottom, you will see the minimum group prime results. And this breakdown now will give you two colors. One is sort of, it's orange when you're matched with somebody who has a contrary opinion about Trump. And green is if they have the same opinion. On the next slide, I will break it down conditional on a participant's own preference about Trump. For now, it's going to be aggregate. On the left-hand side, you will see the perception of closeness based on the measure of the iOS scale. And on the right-hand side, you will see sort of the dictator game behavior. Negative means they decided to take money away from the participants, right? And the way I will be able to now look at whether something is in-group love, out-group hate is by comparing the levels between how participants played and felt in the Trump prime versus the minimum group prime. I will show you what that looks like. So let's first, look at the Trump prime. What I can pick up already is a very stark divide. I see a very big discrepancy on how people felt and how close they felt towards their own people who feel the same way about Trump versus those who felt others differently. In terms of behavior, if a participant was matched with somebody who had the same opinion, so you both hated Trump or you both loved Trump, we see a lot of type of in-group bias, right? We see a lot of in-group preference. The participants are willing to give money to that person. Now, in order to establish equality between you and the recipient, you would need to give 50% of that money. And so that's not what we see. They do give a little bit, but they don't achieve equality. But we do see quite stark antisocial behavior. So if you match with somebody who has an opinion about Trump that is contrary to yours, we see that participants are willing to take about 20% away from that recipient's endowment. Now, this asymmetry is also significant, right? So I can test that the extent of antisocial behavior is larger than the pro-social. It's not really a relevant result in this paper, but it is aligned with some of other people's work in my own that shows that sort of bad behavior is often overproportionally larger than sort of the good behavior in this context. Now, I can do the same thing for minimal group, and what you will see, what will make my life easier, because the right approach to analyzing this data is sort of diff and diff, right? The difference between how they feel in the Trump prime with the difference how they feel in the minimal group prime. All the minimal group prime results are going to be completely null results, very well estimated null results. Whether you're being matched with somebody who has the same or contrary painting preference is going to not matter along any domain. And so they feel the same way about in terms of perception and also in terms of behavior. Now, I promised you that the real question here is, which of these things is an example or is a result of in-group love, and which of those is the result of out-group hate? And this is the way I will be able to look at that. If we look at the extent to which in the Trump prime people play with the out-group, how they feel towards the out-group, the extent to which they feel close to the out-group is exactly the same as the extent to which people in the minimal group paradigm feel towards the out-group. So what I'm picking up in terms of closeness, it's not out-group hate, it's in-group love, because the in-group preference in terms of closeness is twice as large and much more, much larger than anything compared to the minimal group prime. And interestingly, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sorry. Before you go ahead, there's one question about this results. Could the intensity of the Trump prime have washed out the minimal group prime?
Could intensity about it? Yeah, I mean that's the question that. So the intensity of the Trump prime affects both the Trump treatment and the middle group prime sort of in the same way. Now, could the Trump prime override the middle group prime, and that's the reason why I'm not picking up these results? That could be the case. There's no easy way to test that, because if I remove the Trump prime, then I'm now changing the prime condition too. I think it's a good question. In the paper, I'm not making any statements about the reasons why I find these complete null results, whereas other papers show sometimes the minimal group paradigm works and sometimes it doesn't. The way I like to believe this here is that this was done online, so people might feel even less closeness about like random signals like the minimal group prime. And the second one is that in this experiment the stakes are quite high, and so maybe that's in this particular context that's what they're focused on. So I think it's a good question. I'm not sure what it's overriding. I don't test for that, but also in a way it's not super relevant to me, because what I'm trying to understand is sort of the diff and diffs. I'm sort of understanding the difference between these measures versus the difference between these measures. And as long as the gap here is over proportional to this, then this is already sort of enough evidence for me to talk about in-group law. So it's a great question that I, again, sort of don't have the counterfactual for. But let me tell you that, so after sort of showing you that what we see here is in-group love, for the behavior, I see the opposite, which is outgroup hate. So the extent to which people give money to a participant in a minimal group prime is exactly at the same level as they give in the Trump prime. And the negative values and levels that I'm picking up here are unprecedented compared to the minimal group prime. Okay? Now I can do the same exercise by breaking down the results based on the participant's own Trump opinion. So you will see now the results the same way, but now I'm going to condition, because maybe some of these results are driven particularly by Trump lovers, and the Trump haters are very different, right? And so what I can tell you that this is not the case. I don't see a lot of heterogeneity. I see very consistent results. In terms of perceptions, these look exactly the same. And in terms of behavior, they look exactly the same. Now there is, again, if we look at asymmetries, the extent to which this is negative is significantly larger than the extent to which this is positive. But I'm not making anything out of this result, because, again, the diff and diff between those is not different. And so I'm not claiming that those who hate Trump over proportionally take away money from the match partner, because the diff and diff between those is not significant, right? But I'm just picking up that as an observational fact. And when we look at the minimal group prime, again, complete null results, and sort of the previous intuition stands, I see in-group love for the perceptions, because the red bars are sort of at the same height as all of these bars. And I'm picking up out-group hate in terms of behavior, because only in the Trump prime do I even see taking behavior on average, whereas in the minimal group prime, all the behavior is sort of around 10, 20% plus. So here's sort of in other words, just to sort of summarize what you just saw, which is, I mean, although I'm looking at a polarization, what I'm showing you is that there's a nuance to it, right? The bias is more nuanced, because when I'm comparing this to the minimal group paradigm, I see that in-group love is in a perceptual domain and outgroup hate in the behavioral domain. Now, it's good to show that in sort of a non-strategic setting, and I think it's interesting from a perspective of, if there are no strategic motives, how do we behave towards these other people? But the next step for me was to understand this in a more sort of comprehensive setting, in which I introduce strategic incentives. And so the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the ABC approach of cooperation. And so A stands for attitudes, and B stands for beliefs, and C stands for the actual cooperation contributions. And I'm going to show you how this works, but the reason I'm using this game, and the reason I'm not using a standard public goods game, for example, is because in a standard public goods game, there are many things that are going on at the same time. If we compare between treatments, we don't know whether the changes in behavior responds to my belief about how others will play with me, so I'm not trying to be screwed over, or really my sort of inherent preference or sort of anti-preference towards this other person. So I'm trying to disentangle the reasons why people might play in different ways with different people in the public goods game. And for that context, the ABC approach is perfect, because it allows me really disentangle the different channels that speak to the behavior in the public goods game.
Can you take one question before you present this?
Sure. Yeah, let's go ahead.
About the public good game. It seems, so the question is, it seems that different levels of closeness towards people with similar opinions yield very different replication rates across treatments.
So I'm not sure what replication.
Sorry, I just correct Rustam. It's just in the Trump prime. So the slide before, please, again. Yeah, you have a closeness that is close to 80% for people supporting Trump. I mean, when you agree about your opinion on Trump, and replication is between 10 and 20%. Sorry, the endowment, so change in endowment. And you have the same below. It's about between 10 and 20% of change, but the closeness is half as much, so 40%. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So I guess you say sort of there's a big gap or like high levels here, and they translate to sort of.
It's the green bars actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, do you have an intuition? Like, is there like an intuition in your question, or do you just wonder why it's moved over differently?
I'm wondering why, because I mean, the level of closeness is twice higher in Trump, and you have the same change in the recipient's endowment. So my question, I mean, you should expect, if you have variations, if your story holds, the variations in closeness should induce variations in change in recipient's endowments, no?
So I agree with that, but I don't think the variation is linear in any way or fashion, right? I think people feel closer, but there's sort of a limit to how much money you want to give away. I mean, after all, imagine this is MTurk, and I'm paying them, up to like $15 if they're being chosen to be paid. This is a lot of money for everywhere really, but also especially in MTurk. I agree with you. It's an interesting observation, but I would say I would not expect people to translate how close they feel one-to-one to how nice they are, right? I think you can, if I ask you, how much do you like somebody? You say, well, I like this person quite a lot, but are you willing to give them all of your money? You say, listen, that's not quite the same thing, right? So I think if anything, this shows you that walking the talk is much more difficult, right? And just because you feel close doesn't mean you're actually going to act upon it. So I think it's a nice empirical observation. I don't know why that is, but I think it's important. And you can probably sort of wedge that in existing social preference literature that will show you that, just because you increase the proximity doesn't mean you increase social preference in the same way. But yeah, it's a great observation. All right, so let's talk about the ABC approach. Now, the ABC approach will work in almost the same way, except for that the actual game is different, but the first stage is exactly the same. People either see the Trump prime or the minimal group prime. They see the closeness, they're being matched with somebody who hates or loves Trump or for whom they don't know that. And then once they enter the public goods, the ABC approach, this is the way it will work. There's 3 stages. And I'm going to randomly play the order of those stages. So participants goes through all 3 stages, always, but in different orders. And so the way it will work is the following. So, for example, the first tag could be A, which is attitudes. And so this is, according to the ABC approach, you're basically doing a strategy method. And I'm going to ask you, based on what this other participant could play, I'm not telling you what your sort of partner is playing, but based on what your partner could play, partner could give $1 or $2 to the pot, or 3 or 4. Tell me what you would do in response to that. So this is just a standard strategy method elicitation, and it allows me to later characterize participants according to different types. Either you're a conditional cooperator or a free rider or unconditional and so on, right? Everything is quite standard. So if you know this old school Fischbacher-Vergechter paper of how they did this, basically that's exactly how I'm doing this. And then they move on to the second task, which could be B, which is beliefs. And now I ask them, what do you believe is this other person that you're matched with actually going to do? I'm going to incentivize you. I mean, everything is incentive compatible, right? And I'm going to incentivize you to tell me what you believe your partner is going to contribute to the pot. And then you move on to the third stage, which is your actual one-shot effective cooperation in a public goods game. So now I'm going to ask you, how much do you want to contribute to the public goods game between $0 and $10? Now, the way this will be paid out is I'm going to tell you that after you gave me your responses to A, B, and C, I'm going to randomly choose one of those tasks, and I'm going to pay you according to that task. right? And so everything is incentive compatible. And you can already see that this gives me so much more than a public goods game, because not only do I actually know what people do in a public goods game, I also measure their beliefs about this other person's behavior, but I'm also measuring the whole sort of schedule, the way sort of Zima likes to call it, right? So the whole schedule of participants' preference towards other participants. So I'm not bound to just observing what's happening in a public goods game. I'm observing everything that the participant would have done, in every variation of the world. And then I'm doing exactly the same thing in a minimal group primes. There's no real reason for me to talk much about that. They're just being matched with a minimal group person, and then they just do the same thing, ABC approach, right? So the reason I'm doing that is because I'm actually able to answer a couple additional questions, and this will have policy implications. Because the question is, you just saw that there's some negative impact of polarization. You saw there is some discrepancy between how they play with people and how they feel towards them. But the question is this due to a belief channel in the real world, or is this due to a preference channel? Is it because we, if we have these, this in-group, out-group biases and polarization, is this because we completely refuse to cooperate with somebody from the opposing political aisle? Or is this because we believe that if we're matched with them, we might be screwed over by them? And that's something that I can pick up now using this ABC approach. And of course, that yields policy implications, because if we know that, for example, the belief channel is the problematic one, then we can try to work with that and try to sort of, do some belief management. If we just have very deeply divided attitudes, then that would require a little bit more effort to correct that. So here are the results. Again, I'm going to show the results in exactly the same way, but now you will see one additional, you will see sort of different DVs in terms of behavior. So you again will see the perception of closeness. This is the iOS scale. But then here you can also see the beliefs about the other participants' contribution, and also my actual own factual contribution, right? And so at the top, what you will see, again, this very stark divide. Not only do people feel differently in terms of closeness, but they also have this differential belief and differential own contribution. Now you see sort of the gap closes here. It's still highly significant. But we see that, that might go a little bit in the direction of what Romain just said, right? They have a different perception, but how they behave now is a little bit different, right? We don't see quite the same gap here. But again, because I'm actually interested in showing you which of those things is in-group love and which of those is in-group hate, I'm going to compare this to the minimal group prime. And as for the dictator game, I see absolutely no differences across the minimal group variations. And again, look at the height of the bars. I'm picking up again that the perception of closeness corresponds to the minimal group prime with respect to how we feel about the other party. But in terms of behavior, it's all about the in-group love, right? And so the way we believe how other people feel is at the height of the minimal group prime, and the way we sort of contribute to the others is at the height of the minimal group prime. So again, so what this tells us is, for the perception of closeness, we feel stronger in-group love. In terms of beliefs and own contributions, we see an example of out-group hate, because all of these red bars are significantly below all of these bars at the bottom. And so of course, now you can subdivide this result along different domains, and I'm doing that in the paper. But the important part now, of course, is the attitudes. So what you can see now at this point is that there are beliefs that are misguided. And why are these beliefs misguided? Because we believe that the outgroup is going to contribute about 40%. But the extent to which people actually behave towards the outgroup is significantly higher. So if you compare sort of these red bars, you can see that our belief is much more negative than the actual behavior in that game. And so there's sort of a belief discrepancy. But now the question is this also driven by the fact that people might not be willing to cooperate with each other? And so now this is sort of the typical breakdown of the types according to the ABC method. And you can see conditional cooperators and unconditional free riders and so on. And at the top, you see the Trump prime, and at the bottom, you see the minimal group prime. And the key takeaway for you here is none of that is significant. So what does this mean? Right? We do see sort of slight differences between those, but none of those are significant at the level that is pre-registered and for which sort of the study's power to detect. What this means is that people are actually completely willing to be a conditional cooperator with somebody who has an opposing opinion about Trump. right? They are as willing to cooperate with them if they have the same opinion, and compared to if they have an opposing opinion about Trump. So what we see in terms of why people don't cooperate with each other, it's not because they have an inherent attitude difference that is saying, if you're a Trump supporter, I'm never going to play with you, nice with you, and if you have the same opinion about me, about Trump as I do, then, and I will, we don't see any difference in attitudes, but we see the stark difference in behaviors. And now we can sort of pin down the reason for that. It's not an attitudes channel, it's a belief channel. It's because we actually believe that if we're being matched with somebody who has an opposing opinion about Trump, we might be screwed over. Now, I'm just anticipating one of the questions, which is, how much did sort of participants know, like from a perspective of a player, what did I know, did the other participant know about me? And so, of course, it was common knowledge. So I knew that my Trump preference will also be displayed to my partner, and the partner knew that their Trump preference will be displayed to me. So that basically means that people anticipate that the partner who knows that I have a different opinion about Trump, they will play not nice with me. They will sort of free ride on me much more than they actually do. All right.
I have a quick question about your design. So in your non-strategic environment, you have this give and take, right, options. I was just wondering whether it would be possible to implement this give and take options in like a public good game, because here you only have the like the pro-social, right, not the anti-social as you presented for the
Yeah. It's a great point. No, so I'm not the ABC approach you can probably extend this approach to the antisocial domain. I wanted to use sort of standardized settings because there's already so much that I do in this paper that I didn't want to also introduce new games to capture sort of those things. But I think it's a good point. Maybe there's a way. If you think about the paper, the Dimant paper in Nature Human Behavior, they're testing the impact of framing on sort of behavior. And they sort of show it's a different thing whether you're starting with a public goods contribution frame as opposed to a common pool resource game. And in a way, you can probably design a game like this using a taking option, where you can maybe give already some money to the pool, and you can give people an option not only to contribute to the pool, but also basically extract already money on the side from the pool. If you have ideas, I'm happy to hear them. I have not designed that game for this purpose, but I think you can probably do that, as you can probably do with any sort of public goods game. Right? Yeah. So let me give you some intuition, and then I want to, show you just sort of the final set of results, and I want to have some time for questions, which is consistent with experiment 1. What I show you is that the polarization has a very nuanced impact. We see in-group love with respect to feelings, but we see out-group hate with respect to beliefs and behavior. But there's no out-group, in-group, out-group differentiation in terms of types. People are completely willing to be cooperative with each other, according to my setting, according to my prime. And so the belief channel is what sort of drives the polarization, because we believe the other party will not play nice with us. Right? And so you can think of this, because this is about the Trump prime, and we don't see any of these results in the minimal group prime. You can think of that as an emotional state in a way that's evoked by this political polarization. Now, above and beyond, I can sort of now narrow down that mechanism. And so what this tells us is we need to find ways to correct for these, what I call fallacious beliefs. We believe we're being screwed over by the opposing party, although empirically that's not actually the case in this experiment. Right? So belief management could be one way to correct it. So let me show you a very short slide on the norm elicitation results. I'm not going to show you any results graphically, but what I can tell you is that essentially all of the behaviors that you saw, the way participants played with the out-group and in-group, are very much aligned with the social norm elicitation of group behavior, right? For those of you who don't know how that elicitation works, essentially it's an injunctive side of a norm elicitation. You ask people to sort of coordinate on what the majority will say, how appropriate a certain action is. And the way this works in my experiment is I take completely different people, none of whom have played any of my experiments before. I explain to them the dictator game, or I explain to them the public goods game, and I tell them, so imagine a participant takes money away from another participant, and that participant has the same opinion about Trump or a different opinion about Trump and whatnot. And I vary the context. And then they have to say how socially inappropriate or appropriate a certain action is, but not what they believe is socially inappropriate, but what they believe the majority of all the people who take this normal elicitation will say, right? And so I'm just going to put all of these results up because they are very much in line. This in-group, out-group differentiation shows up again in the norms. What this tells you is that people actually do believe that it's appropriate and absolutely okay to discriminate against the opposing party. Right? And by the way, I'm only doing this for the Trump prime. I also have this for the minimal group prime, and obviously nothing comes out. Nobody thinks it's okay to discriminate against somebody who's a Klee fan if you're a Kandinsky fan, right? None of that shows up, but they think it's inappropriate to steal money, let's say, from somebody who likes Trump and you also like Trump, so it's an in-group, but it's more okay to steal money if they hate Trump but you love Trump, right? So then this in-group outgroup shows up. And you can connect this to the to the social norms literature, not to the Trump literature, because it tells you that the combination of this experiment with the public goods experiment tells you that we have here a case of conditional norm followers. People condition their beliefs on their behavior. They condition their behavior based on the beliefs that they have about what the other party will do, but also about the normative expectations that participants have in this experiments, and they are guiding sort of their actions. So I have here's a concluding slide, and I have some surprising results, but maybe I'll open for questions before I show you something very new, which is, let me just conclude that I think this paper tries to show along different domains and different experimental settings that political polarization as measured with Trump has detrimental impact on cooperation, on altruism, and on feelings of closeness. Now, the question is this specific to Trump? And I can tell you that it's not. I've run, after the election, I've run the same experiments, everything that you just saw. I ran this also with the Biden prime. So rather than seeing like Trump with the mega hat and a thumbs up, I found like a picture that was similar to that, where Biden had this thumbs up, of course, no mega hat. And I see the same differentiations. This is not about Trump. This is really about how much people are sort of affected by the polarization that's going on in the US. In a way, you can think of Biden as being the flip side of the coin of Trump, because right now everything is about pro-Biden or pro-Trump and so on. And yeah, policy perspective, I talked about this already. So is there a way to sort of correct to the polarization? And one of the ways in which you can do that is to correct for the misguided beliefs that I picked up. Now, this is the last question I'm going to leave here before I show you what I did next, and then I'm just opening for some questions, which is sometimes you cannot correct for beliefs, and sometimes beliefs don't matter as much. Like in the dictator game, for example, beliefs don't really matter as much, other than you might think of the beliefs as meta-beliefs, of sort of saying, well, I am a dictator now, but if you were the dictator and I was in that position, I'm assuming that you would have sort of stolen money from me, and I'm sort of using this meta-belief as a justification for me to be bad towards you now, right? So I'm just sort of using that as an excuse for me to be bad towards you, because I think if the table was turned, you would take money away from me, right? So sometimes beliefs don't really, we cannot really affect those beliefs as well. So the question is, what else can we do? And I will show you what I tried to do on the next slides, but maybe for now, let me just open for questions that anybody has.
So there's one question about this difference in in-group love and out-group hate. So in-group love in dictator and the public good game is costly, but out-group hate is profitable. So maybe that's why we see more of out-group hate than in-group love.
Yeah, but I don't think that explains why we don't see out-group hate in the beliefs, right? Or we don't. I mean, I agree with you in the context of the behaviors. Is in a way, from a monetary point of view, it's always nicer to be. It's always easier to take money and get more payment. But you can see that this differs across the primes. We didn't quite see that difference in the minimal group prime. And I think the way you should think about my results is sort of this difference in difference comparison, which is how big is the gap in the Trump prime versus how big or non-existent is the gap in the minimal group prime. So yeah, I think settings like these always lend themselves to be antisocial. We know that people are not always antisocial. You've seen levels of pro-sociality in my results. But because there are many reasons why, right? There are reputation effects, and we know that somebody else is harmed and whatnot. I think what your intuition cannot explain is why don't we see more like in-group love and out-group hate simultaneously, or one thing everywhere, or why don't we see the same thing in a middle group rhyme and so on. So I think there's a little bit more going on, and I try to sort of tease apart different channels to which sort of this show that.
Are you happy already with the answer? Follow up? Yeah.
It was my question, so I'm not sure I understood the answer. It's just the whole project is very rich and it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
Well, just to say that I can't say if I agree or not or understand or not, just because it's a lot to take in. But
yeah.
Just so you know,
but you and I will have a call scheduled anyway, so we can chat about that.
Yeah. Okay.
So we still have time for questions.
So I have 2 more results slides that I'm going to show you as soon as there are no more sort of questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so one thing that I tried to do was then to see, so how can we correct for these polarization that we observe? And the approach that I took here was to nudge participants. And I used a default nudge. I sort of used a nudge that would use the same setting as you just saw. Everything is exactly the same as before. But for the participants, the most pro-social action is pre-selected. So in the dictator game, it would be you give all of the money, sort of all the 5, in a dictator game, you give exactly half of your money to the participant. That was the default option, which means that equality was the default, right? And so you had to actively move away from that option if you want to do something else. If you just, click next, then the sort of equality would have been implemented. And for the corporation, for the ABC game, it's going to be full cooperation and full positive releases, all right? So I'm using a standard default mechanism, trying to see whether this will remove the in-group, out-group bias that you just saw, right? And so, Rustam, what is your intuition? What do you think? Does that, at default, let me just tell you that for those of you who don't work in the nudge literature, default is what's usually claimed to be the most impactful way to change behavior. Across different meta-studies, the default is what changes behavior, simple behaviors, much more than social norm nudges or anything like that. So I'm using a default nudge here. So Rustam, to avoid you telling me, oh, I knew that all along, do you believe that default option is going to remove that bias?
You should have one of those betting markets, right? Just
yeah. What is your intuition? Do you think anything will change here?
Yeah, I don't know. I would probably bet on the default. I would go for the default nudge, definitely.
So you think it will reduce at least the polarization? What I can tell you that it absolutely doesn't work, right? So what the default does, and so Paulo, yeah, of course, yeah. I was about to say, I see Paulo sort of like nodding with his head. So what you can see is that there's an upward shift. You can see there's an upward shift. We can see more pro-sociality towards the in-group, and we can see less anti-sociality towards the out-group. But the gap is completely the same, right? And there's nothing that changed. People actively change the default away from being nice to the out-group much more than they do switch away from the in-group. And you can see it's exactly the same if you break it down across. So it's not so much that those who feel different about Trump respond differently to this nudge, right? We do see a little bit of a difference here. The Trump lovers, this is significant at the 5% level. So we sort of get the Trump lovers closer to closing the gap, but really we don't close the gap, right? So that's the intuition here. Again, I'm doing the same thing for the public goods game, and it doesn't work at all, right? Not only, the levels do shift upwards a little bit, but really in a minimal way. The gap is completely the same as it was before. And also it doesn't change anything in terms of types. So it's not so much that now we can see a different composition of conditional cooperators, anything across the experiment, right? It's just the default helps to move people up, but this in-group, out-group differentiation and the hostility that they have towards the other faction remains and cannot be closed with this default, which is really sobering. Those of you who work in nudging know that there's a lot of nudges, many nudges that fail, and there might be different reasons why, the default nudge fails here. But this was the most straightforward way of fixing the polarization, and it absolutely didn't work, right? And I think this is the takeaway. And so with that, I would like to close. Again, Uri said it right. I gave you a feeling for the results, but there's probably twice as many results in the actual paper because there's a bunch of breakdowns by, how do you play with somebody for whom you don't know how to feel about Trump, and then have all the social norm stuff. I'm hoping I didn't sort of kill you with details, but I tried to give you an overview of sort of this agenda that tries to understand how in-group, out-group polarization, political polarization affects social preference, and it just varies according to the domain. And if you want to check out the paper, you can scan this QR code, but of course you can always chat with me and hit me up. So for now, thanks so much for your attention.